Commander Vexthar stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching the human soldiers below with barely hidden disgust. His forearms crossed behind his back, the tall Keltharian officer shook his scaled head as he observed what the Galactic Defense Coalition called their newest members. The humans were small. Embarrassingly small. Vexthar's own species stood nearly 8 feet tall, with natural armor plating and strength that could crush steel. The crystalline Zephyrians were living weapons, their bodies made of hardened crystal that could deflect energy blasts. Even the cybernetic Nexari had replaced their weak flesh with superior metal and circuits. But these humans? They looked like children playing at war. On the training ground below, Captain Li Hyun was leading his squad through what appeared to be basic exercises. Vexthar watched as the human captain, barely 6 feet tall and weighing perhaps 200 pounds, demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques to his soldiers. The commander nearly laughed out loud. "Primitive," Vexthar muttered, speaking into his recording device. "Their movements are slow and their techniques are crude. Any Keltharian warrior could defeat 10 of these creatures without effort." Sergeant Park Jun was running his own training session nearby. The human sergeant had his soldiers crawling through mud, carrying heavy packs and practicing with weapons that looked ancient compared to the plasma rifles and energy cannons used by proper military forces. The humans used simple projectile weapons that fired small metal bullets. Vexthar had read the reports about these kinetic weapons and found them laughably outdated. "They still use chemical explosives and metal projectiles," he continued his recording. "It is like watching Stone Age creatures trying to fight with sticks and rocks. I cannot understand why the Coalition accepted such a backward species into our military alliance." The human soldiers moved with what their instructors called discipline, but Vexthar saw only weakness. They were not naturally armored like his people. They had no built-in weapons like the Zephyrians. They could not interface directly with technology like the Nexari. They were just soft pink creatures with no special abilities at all. Private Choi Min was practicing marksmanship with her squad. Vexthar watched as she lay flat on the ground, holding her primitive rifle steady, and fired at targets hundreds of meters away. The shots were accurate, he had to admit. But what good would such weapons do against real enemies with real armor? "Their accuracy is acceptable," Vexthar recorded, "but their weapons lack the power to penetrate modern defensive systems. These humans would be slaughtered in the first minutes of actual combat." Corporal Yoon Soo was teaching his team about explosives. The humans gathered around tables covered with what looked like crude chemical devices. They handled the explosives carefully, learning about timers and triggers and blast patterns. Vexthar had seen Keltharian plasma charges that could level entire buildings with a single blast. These human explosives looked like toys in comparison. As the day continued, Vexthar observed more human training exercises. They practiced something they called urban warfare, fighting in mock cities and buildings. They learned to move quietly, to communicate with hand signals, and to work together in small groups. Everything they did seemed designed around the idea that they were weak and had to be clever to survive. "They have developed tactics based entirely on their own limitations," Vexthar noted. "Rather than becoming stronger, they have simply learned to hide their weakness better." The human officers gathered for their daily briefing. Colonel Kim Dae stood before a group of captains and sergeants, discussing training schedules and equipment maintenance. She spoke calmly and clearly, but Vexthar could see no real authority in her bearing. How could such a small creature command respect from warriors? "Their command structure appears functional," he recorded, "but I question how effective their leadership can be when their leaders possess no obvious physical superiority over their subordinates." As evening approached, Vexthar prepared his daily report for Coalition Command. He had been assigned to evaluate human military capabilities and provide recommendations for their deployment in future operations. His assessment was not favorable. After extensive observation, he dictated to his computer, "I must strongly recommend that human forces be limited to support roles only. They lack the physical capabilities, advanced technology, and natural weapon systems possessed by other Coalition species. Their equipment is primitive, their tactics are overly complex, and their individual combat effectiveness is minimal." He paused, watching through the window as human soldiers cleaned their weapons and prepared for the next day's training. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking every piece of equipment carefully and maintaining their gear with obvious pride. There was something about their dedication that puzzled him. but he dismissed the feeling. While the humans show adequate discipline and organization, he continued, they would be a liability in actual combat situations. I recommend they be assigned to logistics, medical support, or other non-combat roles where their weaknesses will not endanger Coalition forces. Vexthar finished his report and submitted it to Coalition Command. He felt satisfied that he had provided an honest and accurate assessment. The humans seemed like decent enough creatures, but war was not a place for the weak. It would be cruel to send them into battle against real enemies. His communication device suddenly chimed with an urgent message. The display showed the highest priority alert level, red and flashing. Vexthar opened the message and felt his blood run cold. Urgent. Massive Void Reaper fleet detected approaching Outer Rim. Estimated arrival in 48 hours. All Coalition forces prepare for immediate deployment. This is not a drill. The Void Reapers. Vexthar had fought them before years ago, when they had first appeared from the dark space between galaxies. They were nightmare creatures, flying living ships that could dissolve metal and corrupt technology with their bioweapons. The last time they had appeared, it had taken the combined might of 12 different species to drive them back. Now they were returning, and the Coalition would need every warrior it could find. Vexthar looked down at the human training ground one more time. The soldiers were still there, still practicing, still preparing for a war they didn't even know was coming. He felt a moment of sympathy for them. Soon they would face the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy, and he doubted many of them would survive. The commander turned away from the window and began preparing for the emergency briefing that would surely come within hours. The real test of every Coalition species was about to begin, and he feared the humans would not be ready for what was coming. As the battle continued, Vexthar found himself doing something he had never imagined possible, asking humans for tactical advice. The Coalition forces were in complete disarray. Their sophisticated battle plans had collapsed within the first hour of fighting. Ships designed by the greatest military minds in the galaxy were floating dead in space, their crews either evacuated or dead. The carefully coordinated attack formations had become a desperate struggle for survival, but the humans were not just surviving, they were systematically destroying Reaper ships with tactics that defied everything Vexthar had learned in military academy. Colonel Kim Day, he transmitted to the human command ship. Swallowing his pride, we need your strategic assessment. Our current approach is clearly ineffective. The response came back immediately, calm and professional. Commander Vexthar, recommend immediate implementation of guerrilla warfare protocols. Avoid direct confrontation with superior forces. Target enemy supply lines and command structures. Vexthar stared at his communication display. Guerrilla warfare? That was something primitive species used when they lacked proper military equipment. How could such crude tactics work against an advanced enemy like the Void Reapers? Colonel, with respect, guerrilla tactics are designed for ground combat between unequal forces. This is space warfare against technologically superior enemies. Commander, Kim Day's voice carried a note of gentle patience. Space is just another battlefield. The principles remain the same. Use mobility against size, intelligence against strength, and turn the enemy's advantages into weaknesses. Against his better judgment, Vexthar found himself following the human colonel's suggestions. He ordered the surviving Coalition ships to break formation and begin hit-and-run attacks instead of direct engagement. The results were immediate and shocking. Keltharian ships that had been sitting targets for Reaper bioweapons suddenly became effective when they stopped trying to fight toe-to-toe with the larger bioships. Zephyrian crystal vessels used their superior speed to strike quickly and retreat before the enemy could respond. Even the damaged Nexari ships found ways to contribute by jamming Reaper communications and disrupting their coordination. Meanwhile, Corporal Yoon Soo was demonstrating exactly what Colonel Kim Day meant about turning enemy advantages into weaknesses. His assault team had infiltrated a Reaper command vessel, not through advanced teleportation technology or stealth fields, but by literally cutting a hole in the ship's hull and crawling inside. Vexthar watched through drone footage as Yoon Soo's squad moved through the bioship's interior corridors. The passages were alive, pulsing with organic rhythms and covered with what looked like nerve clusters. Any other species would have been overwhelmed by the alien environment, but the humans seemed perfectly comfortable fighting in hostile territory. This is like urban warfare, Yoon Soo reported over the communication link. The ship has central nervous systems just like a city has power grids. Find the right nerve cluster, plant the charges, and the whole system goes down. Vexthar had no idea what urban warfare meant, but he watched in amazement as the human squad systematically destroyed the bioship's control systems using simple chemical explosives. The massive vessel, which had been coordinating attacks across the entire Reaper fleet, suddenly went dark and began drifting helplessly through space. Even more disturbing to Vexithar was how the humans seemed to treat this impossible battle as routine. Sergeant Park Jun was leading a fighter squadron against a cluster of Reaper interceptors, and Vexithar could hear him actually laughing over the communication channel as he outmaneuvered enemies twice the size of his ship. "This is like fighting back home," Park Jun reported cheerfully. "Remember the war games in the asteroid fields? Same principle. Use the environment, stay mobile, and never give them a clean shot." Vexthar began reviewing human military history more carefully, trying to understand what he was witnessing. What he found made his blood run cold. Humans had been fighting wars for over 10,000 years. Not occasional conflicts or border disputes, but constant brutal warfare between their own species. They had developed tactics for every possible scenario. Fighting when outnumbered, fighting when outgunned, fighting when surrounded, fighting when their equipment failed, fighting when their command structure was destroyed. Every human tactic was born from desperation and refined through centuries of conflict. They did not fight fair battles between equals. They fought dirty, desperate battles where losing meant extinction. Private Choi Min was currently demonstrating this principle by doing something that should have been impossible. She had managed to capture a living Reaper Queen form, one of the massive bioships that served as command centers for entire fleets. Vexthar watched through her helmet camera as she and her squad moved through the Queen ship's interior. The creature was trying to crush them by contracting its internal passages, but the humans had anticipated this. They had brought cutting tools and explosives specifically designed to deal with living enemies. Standard procedure for hostile territory, Choi Min reported as she planted charges along what appeared to be the creature's spinal column. Secure the perimeter, neutralize defensive systems, and capture high-value targets for intelligence purposes. The Queen form was thrashing desperately, trying to dislodge the human invaders, but Choi Min's team worked with mechanical precision. They had obviously done this before, though Vexthar could not imagine against what enemies. As the charges detonated, the massive bioship went limp. The Queen form was not dead, but it was paralyzed and helpless. Choi Min's squad had accomplished something that an entire Keltharian battle group could not have achieved. "Target secured," she reported with obvious satisfaction, ready for intelligence extraction. Vexthar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The humans were not just adapting to fight the Void Reapers, they were excelling at it. Their entire military doctrine seemed designed specifically for this kind of conflict, but what disturbed him most was watching Corporal Yunsu sacrifice himself to save a Keltharian warform. The Keltharian ship had been caught in a bioacid cloud and was dissolving rapidly. The crew was trapped inside, unable to evacuate before their vessel completely disintegrated. Standard military doctrine said to write off the ship and crew as acceptable losses. Yunsu ignored standard doctrine. Vexthar watched in horror as the human corporal piloted his fighter directly into the acid cloud. The bioweapons that had destroyed advanced alien armor immediately began eating through his simple metal hull. But Yunsu kept flying toward the dying Keltharian ship. "What are you doing?" Vexthar transmitted frantically. "You cannot survive in that environment." "Buying time," Yunsu replied calmly. "Keltharian crew needs 30 seconds to reach escape pods. I can give them 40. The human fighter was dissolving around him, its hull melting away piece by piece, but Yunsu continued flying. He used his ship's remaining weapons to clear a path through the acid cloud, creating a safe corridor for the Keltharian escape pods. With 15 seconds left before his ship completely disintegrated, Yunsu managed to plant explosive charges that dispersed the bioacid cloud. The Keltharian crew escaped safely, their lives saved by a human who had known he was going to die. As Yunsu's fighter finally fell apart, Vexthar heard the corporal's final transmission. "Mission accomplished. Take care of my squad." The Keltharian commander stared at his display screen, trying to process what he had just witnessed. A human had died to save alien lives. not because of orders or military obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. For the first time in his long military career, Vexthar began to understand that strength was not measured in armor thickness or weapon power. He was watching warriors who had learned to be strong in ways he had never imagined possible, and they were winning a battle that should have been impossible to win. The emergency briefing room was filled with tension. Representatives from every coalition species sat around the massive holographic display showing the approaching Void Reaper fleet. The bioships appeared as dark, twisted shapes against the stars, moving like a plague of insects toward coalition space. General Korthak, a massive Keltharian with battle scars covering his armored hide, stood at the head of the table. His voice rumbled through the room as he outlined the threat they all faced. The Void Reaper fleet numbers over 3,000 ships, he announced. Intelligence reports indicate they have developed new bioweapons since our last encounter. Our previous defensive strategies may no longer be effective. Vexthar studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Reaper fleet was larger than anything they had faced before. The bioships moved in strange patterns, clustering and separating like living creatures rather than military vessels. It was unsettling to watch. "What forces do we have available?" asked Commander Thexol of the Zephyrian Crystal Guard. "The 5th Keltharian Battle Group, the Zephyrian Defense Fleet, 3 Nixari Cyber Squadrons, and..." General Korthak paused, glancing at his datapad with obvious reluctance. "The newly integrated human colonial forces." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Several alien commanders exchanged worried glances. The humans had only been part of the coalition for 6 months, and this would be their first major battle. Colonel Kim Day sat quietly at the far end of the table, representing the human forces. She was smaller than everyone else in the room, wearing a simple uniform that looked plain compared to the elaborate armor and technological enhancements of the other species. Vexthar noticed how the other commanders seemed to forget she was even there. With respect, "General," Vexthar said, rising from his seat, "I must question the wisdom of including human forces in this operation. My evaluation of their capabilities suggests they are not ready for combat of this intensity." Several other commanders nodded in agreement. Commander Zethrak of the Nexari spoke up, his cybernetic voice emotionless. "The humans lack the natural defenses necessary to survive Void Reaper bioweapons. Their primitive equipment will be useless against organic technology. Their weapons are outdated," added Commander Thexol. "Kinetic projectiles cannot penetrate bioarmor effectively. They will be slaughtered." Colonel Kim Day listened to the discussion without expression. When the room fell silent, she spoke for the first time during the briefing. "Give us a chance to prove ourselves," she said simply. Her calm confidence puzzled Vexthar. Did she not understand what they were facing? The Void Reapers were not training targets or simulation enemies. They were living nightmares that had destroyed entire civilizations. "Colonel," General Korthak said carefully, "the Void Reapers are unlike any enemy your species has encountered. Their bioweapons can dissolve most known materials. Their ships are alive and can heal damage faster than conventional weapons can inflict it. This is not the kind of battle where courage alone is sufficient." "I understand, General," Kim Day replied, "but human forces are ready to do their part." Vexthar felt compelled to speak again. "General, I strongly recommend that human forces be assigned to rear guard positions only. They could assist with evacuation procedures and supply line protection, while the main coalition forces engage the enemy." "I agree," said Commander Zethrak. "Human casualties would be unacceptable if they are placed in direct combat roles." The discussion continued for another hour as the commanders planned their strategy. The Keltharian forces would form the main battle line with their heavy armor and powerful weapons. The Zephyrians would provide long-range support with their crystal-based energy cannons. The Nexari would handle electronic warfare and cyber attacks against any Reaper technology systems. The humans would be positioned in the rear, supposedly to protect the supply lines but really to keep them out of the main battle. Vexthar felt this was the wisest course of action. It would prevent unnecessary human casualties while allowing the real warriors to handle the serious fighting. After the briefing, Vexthar returned to the observation deck to watch the coalition forces prepare for departure. The massive Keltharian battle cruisers powered up their engines, their armored hulls gleaming under the station's lights. The Zephyrian ships looked like floating crystals, beautiful and deadly. The Nexari vessels bristled with advanced technology and weapon systems, And then there were the human ships. They looked almost primitive compared to the other Coalition vessels. The hulls were simple metal construction with no fancy armor plating or energy shields. The weapons were basic kinetic cannons and missile launchers. Even their engines seemed outdated, using chemical fuel instead of the advanced power systems used by other species. Captain Lee Hyun was briefing his soldiers in the human section of the station. Vexthar watched through the security monitors as the human captain explained their mission to his troops. The soldiers listened carefully, asking questions about enemy capabilities and tactical options. "We'll be providing rearguard support," Lee Hyun told his squad. "Our job is to protect the supply lines and assist with evacuation procedures if necessary." Sergeant Park Jun raised his hand. "Sir, what if the main fleet needs additional support?" "We follow orders, Sergeant," the captain replied. "But we stay ready for anything." Vexthar noticed something strange about the human soldiers as they prepared for deployment. They showed no signs of fear or nervousness. Private Choi Min was checking her weapon with the same calm efficiency she had shown during training. Corporal Yoon Soo was reviewing tactical maps with his squad, discussing possible scenarios and response plans. They acted as if this was just another training exercise, not a battle against the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. Vexthar wondered if they truly understood what they were about to face, or if their ignorance was simply protecting them from the fear that any rational being should feel. The human ships launched first, taking up their assigned positions in the rear of the Coalition formation. Their small vessels looked lost among the massive alien warships, like children's toys mixed in with real military equipment. As the fleet moved toward the outer rim to intercept the Void Reaper advance, Vexthar reviewed the human military files one more time. He wanted to understand these strange creatures better before the battle began. What he found in their historical records disturbed him more than he expected. The humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, not against alien invaders or cosmic threats, but against each other. Their entire military doctrine had been developed through constant conflict, endless wars between different human nations and groups. They had learned to fight when outnumbered. They had developed tactics for winning when outgunned. They had created strategies for survival when facing superior enemies. Everything about human warfare seemed designed around the assumption that they would always be the weaker force. Vexthar closed the files and stared out at the approaching battle zone. Perhaps he had been wrong about human capabilities. Perhaps their weakness was not a disadvantage but a different kind of strength. But it was too late to change the battle plan now. The Void Reapers were waiting ahead, and soon they would all discover what humans were truly capable of when their backs were against the wall. The first wave of Void Reaper bioships emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare-given form. Their hulls were not metal or crystal, but living tissue that pulsed with alien life. Tendrils and spines covered their surfaces, and they moved through space with the fluid grace of hunting predators. Vexthar watched from the command bridge of the Keltharian flagship as the enemy fleet spread across their sensors. The bioships were even larger than intelligence reports had suggested, some stretching over 2 kilometers in length. Worse, they had indeed developed new weapons since the last encounter. "All forces engage at maximum range," General Korthak commanded over the fleet communication system. "Do not allow them to close to bioweapon range." The Coalition fleet opened fire with everything they had. Keltharian plasma cannons sent streams of superheated energy toward the enemy ships. Zephyrian crystal arrays launched focused light beams that could cut through asteroid belts. Nexari cyberships unleashed waves of electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt enemy systems. For a moment, Vexthar felt hope. The first volleys struck the Reaper ships and seemed to cause significant damage. Bioships writhed and twisted as energy beams burned through their living hulls. Several smaller vessels appeared to be dead in space. Then the Reapers fired back. The bioweapons they unleashed were unlike anything the Coalition had faced before. Instead of energy beams or kinetic projectiles, the Reaper ships launched clouds of what looked like living acid. The organic weapons moved through space like schools of fish, seeking out Coalition vessels with intelligent purpose. When the bioweapons reached the Coalition fleet, the results were catastrophic. Vexthar watched in horror as a Keltharian battlecruiser was engulfed by a cloud of bioacid. The ship's armor, designed to withstand plasma cannon fire, began dissolving like sugar in water. Emergency broadcasts filled the communication channels as the crew reported that their hull was literally melting around them. A Zephyrian crystal ship tried to use its energy shields to deflect the bioweapons, but the organic acid simply flowed around the energy barriers like liquid finding cracks in a dam. The beautiful crystal hull cracked and shattered as the acid ate through the living mineral structure. The Nexari cyberships fared even worse. Their electronic systems went haywire when exposed to the bioweapons, as if the organic acid carried some kind of technological virus. Ships that had been perfectly functional moments before began firing on their own allies or spinning helplessly out of control. All ships, fall back to secondary positions, General Korthak ordered, but his own flagship was already under attack. Vexthar could hear the panic in the general's voice as he reported that their armor was failing. The coalition's carefully planned battle formation collapsed within minutes. Ships that had dominated battlefields for decades were reduced to helpless victims, their crews screaming for help over the communication channels as their vessels dissolved around them. Vexthar felt despair settling over him like a cold blanket. The coalition's most advanced weapons were useless against these new bioweapons. Their strongest defenses were being eaten away like ancient paper. How could they possibly win this battle? His communication console chimed with an incoming transmission from the rear guard position. To his amazement, it was Captain Li Hyun of the Human Forces. Human Forces requesting permission to advance to front lines. The captain's voice was calm and professional, as if he was asking about routine patrol assignments. Vexthar stared at the communication display in disbelief. Did this human not understand what was happening? The most advanced military forces in the galaxy were being destroyed, and he wanted to charge into the battle with primitive weapons and no armor? Absolutely not. Vexthar responded immediately. All rearguard forces are to fall back to evacuation zones immediately. Do not engage the enemy under any circumstances. But even as he gave the order, Vexthar could see on his tactical display that the human ships were not retreating. Instead, they were moving forward, heading directly toward the battle zone where Reaper bioships were hunting down coalition survivors. Human forces, you are ordered to withdraw, he transmitted again. Your weapons cannot penetrate enemy defenses. You will be slaughtered. No response came from the human ships. They continued their advance, their small vessels looking impossibly fragile against the massive bioships that had just destroyed the coalition's finest warships. Vexthar watched helplessly as Sergeant Park Jun led his squad's fighter craft in what appeared to be a suicidal attack run against a Reaper destroyer. The human fighters were tiny compared to the bioship, like insects attacking a giant predator. The Reaper ship launched a cloud of bioacid toward the approaching humans. Vexthar expected to see the human fighters dissolve instantly, just as the Keltharian and Zephyrian ships had done. Instead, something impossible happened. The human fighters punched straight through the bioweapon cloud without taking any damage. Their simple metal hulls, which Vexthar had dismissed as primitive, seemed completely unaffected by the acid that had destroyed advanced alien armor. Park Jun's fighters opened fire with their kinetic weapons, launching simple metal projectiles at the bioship's hull. Vexthar had seen these same weapons bounce harmlessly off standard military armor during training exercises. Against living tissue, however, they were devastatingly effective. The metal bullets tore through the bioship's hull like it was made of soft flesh rather than hardened armor. Streams of alien blood leaked into space as the creature writhed in pain. The massive destroyer, which had shrugged off plasma cannon fire minutes earlier, was being killed by primitive human weapons. Across the battlefield, other human units were achieving similar impossible results. Private Choi Min's assault team had somehow gotten aboard a Reaper cruiser and was fighting hand-to-hand combat inside the living ship. Her squad's chemical explosives, which Vexthar had considered toys, were tearing apart biosystems that energy weapons could not touch. Corporal Yun Su was leading a coordinated attack on a cluster of smaller bioships. His team moved with precision and efficiency, using tactics that seemed insane but somehow worked perfectly. They were not trying to overpower the enemy with superior technology. Instead, they were outsmarting them, using the Reaper's own biological nature against them. Vexthar realized with growing amazement that everything he had dismissed about human military capability was exactly what made them effective against this enemy. Their primitive kinetic weapons were designed to kill living targets, not punch through energy shields or advanced armor. Their simple explosives were chemical-based, perfect for disrupting biological systems. Most importantly, Their tactics were not based on technological superiority, but on fighting smarter enemies with better equipment. Every human strategy assumed they would be outgunned and outnumbered. Against the Void Reapers, this was exactly the kind of thinking that worked. A Reaper bioship tried to ram Captain Lee Hyun's vessel, using its living hull as a weapon. Instead of trying to outrun the larger ship, Lee did something that made Vexthar's blood run cold. The human captain turned his ship directly toward the enemy and accelerated to maximum speed. The two ships collided in a spectacular explosion, but when the debris cleared, it was the Reaper ship that was dead in space. Lee's vessel had somehow survived the impact and was already moving toward the next target. For the first time since the battle began, Vexthar felt something other than despair. The humans were not just surviving against the Void Reapers, they were winning. As he watched Private Choi Min destroy another Reaper destroyer using nothing but explosives and determination, Vexthar began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake in his assessment of human capabilities. These were not weak creatures playing at war. These were warriors who had learned to win when winning should be impossible. The tide of battle shifted completely when Captain Lee Hyun announced his plan for the final assault. Vexthar listened to the human captain's strategy with growing disbelief, certain that what he was hearing would result in the complete destruction of the remaining human forces. "We're going to board the Reaper mothership," Lee Hyun explained over the fleet communication channel. "Direct assault on their command center." General Korthak's voice crackled over the radio from his damaged flagship. "Captain, that's suicide. The mothership is over 5 kilometers long and protected by dozens of escort vessels. No assault team has ever successfully boarded a Reaper command ship. Then we'll be the first," Lee Hyun replied with the same calm confidence that had puzzled Vexthar since the beginning of the battle. Vexthar studied the tactical display showing the massive Reaper mothership. It was a living nightmare, its biohull covered with weapon clusters and defensive systems. Streams of smaller bioships moved around it like antibodies protecting a vital organ. The creature radiated power and malevolence, clearly the source of coordination for the entire enemy fleet. "Captain Lee," Vexthar transmitted, "your assault ships cannot possibly penetrate the mothership's defensive perimeter. The escort vessels will destroy you long before you reach boarding range." The human captain's response made Vexthar question his sanity. "We're not using assault ships, Commander. We're using insertion pods." Insertion pods? Vexthar had never heard the term before. "Single-person spacecraft," Lee Hyun explained. "Minimal life support, maximum armor. We launch ourselves at the target and punch through the hull manually." Vexthar stared at his communication display in horror. The humans were planning to launch themselves through space in tiny metal containers and somehow crash land on an enemy ship that was actively shooting at them. It was not a military tactic, it was elaborate suicide. "That is impossible," he transmitted. "The G-forces alone would kill you, assuming you somehow survived the defensive fire." "Humans are tougher than we look," Lee Hyun replied. "And we've done this before." Before Vexthar could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, the human assault began. Dozens of tiny pods launched from the human ships, each one containing a single soldier in powered armor. The pods looked like metal coffins with small rocket engines attached. Nothing like the sophisticated dropships used by other military forces. The Reaper defensive systems immediately opened fire on the approaching pods. Bioenergy beams and acid projectiles filled the space around the mothership as the creature tried to destroy the human assault force. Vexthar watched in amazement as the simple metal pods proved incredibly difficult to hit. They were too small and fast for the massive bioweapons to target effectively, and their random flight patterns made it almost impossible to predict their movements. Private Choi Min, now wearing the rank insignia of a lance corporal after her previous successes, was piloting one of the lead pods. Vexthar listened to her calm voice over the communication channel as she navigated through the defensive fire, adjusting approach vector, targeting what looks like a docking bay on the ventral surface. Estimated impact in 30 seconds. Her pod, along with dozens of others, slammed into the mothership's hull with tremendous force. Instead of being destroyed by the impact, the pod somehow punched through the bioarmor and disappeared inside the living vessel. "Insertion successful," Choi Min reported. "Beginning interior assault." What followed was unlike anything in Vexthar's military experience. The human soldiers moved through the mothership's interior like they belonged there, fighting their way through passages that were literally alive and hostile. The bioship tried to crush them by contracting its corridors, flood them with acid, and attack them with internal defense systems. But the humans adapted to every threat. Sergeant Park Jun, now promoted to lieutenant after Corporal Yoon Soo's heroic sacrifice, led a squad that seemed to understand the mothership's biology better than the creature understood itself. "This thing has a distributed nervous system," Park Jun reported as his team moved deeper into the ship. "Take out enough nerve clusters and we can paralyze whole sections." The humans used their chemical explosives and kinetic weapons to systematically destroy the mothership's internal systems. What should have been an impossible infiltration mission became a methodical demolition job. But what truly amazed Vexthar was how the humans worked together. Every soldier knew exactly what their teammates were doing without constant communication. When one squad encountered heavy resistance, another team would appear from an unexpected direction to provide support. They moved like a single organism, perfectly coordinated despite being scattered throughout the massive bioship. Colonel Kim Dae coordinated the overall assault from her command ship, treating the impossible battle like a complex puzzle to be solved. She smiled as she watched the tactical display, obviously enjoying the challenge of outthinking an enemy that had defeated the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. Alpha Team, redirect to Section 7. Beta Team, hold position and prepare for flanking maneuver. Gamma Team, I need you to locate the primary neural cluster, she transmitted with calm efficiency. Vexthar realized that this was how humans had always fought, not as individuals seeking glory, but as a unified force where every person understood their role in the larger strategy. They had learned this through thousands of years of warfare against enemies who were stronger, faster, and better equipped. The mothership began to convulse as the human assault teams reached its vital systems. The massive bioship, which had been directing the entire Reaper fleet with perfect coordination, started sending confused and contradictory orders to its escort vessels. Reaper ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly began attacking each other. Bio-vessels that had been providing defensive cover abandoned their positions and fled toward empty space. The entire enemy fleet structure collapsed as their command and control systems failed. Captain Lee Hyun's voice came over the communication channel from deep inside the mothership. "We've reached the central brain cluster, preparing to plant charges." "Negative," Vexthar transmitted frantically. "If you destroy the brain cluster, the entire ship will die instantly. You'll be trapped inside a collapsing biomass." "I know," Lee Hyun replied calmly. "That's why we brought extra rocket fuel for the extraction pods." Vexthar watched in disbelief as the human assault teams fought their way to extraction points throughout the dying mothership. They had planned their escape route before beginning the mission, anticipating that they would need to evacuate from inside a collapsing alien organism. The massive bioship shuddered as its brain cluster was destroyed. The creature's death throes sent shockwaves through space as 5 kilometers of living tissue began to break apart. From various points on the hull, tiny human extraction pods launched themselves clear of the dying vessel. Most of the pods made it to safety, some did not. Vexthar watched Lance Corporal Choi Min's pod emerge from the mothership just seconds before a massive section of biohull collapsed where she had been fighting. Her pod's engines were damaged and it was tumbling helplessly through space, but she was alive. Lieutenant Park Jun's extraction was even more dramatic. His pod launched from what appeared to be the mothership's mouth, riding a geyser of alien blood and tissue as the creature's head exploded from internal damage. Captain Lee Hyun was the last to evacuate. His pod burst free from the mothership's core just as the entire central structure collapsed. The explosion sent his tiny vessel spinning through space like a bullet, but somehow he survived the launch. As the mothership died, the remaining Reaper fleet fell apart completely. Without central coordination, the bioships began fleeing in all directions. Some tried to continue fighting, but they were quickly destroyed by the surviving coalition forces who had learned human tactics during the battle. The battle was over. The impossible had been accomplished. Vexthar sat in stunned silence as he watched the human assault teams being recovered by their ships. They had just achieved the greatest military victory in coalition history, destroying an enemy fleet that should have been invincible, and they acted like it was just another day at work. Colonel Kim, Day was already preparing casualty reports and discussing repair schedules for damaged equipment. Captain Lee Hyun was debriefing his assault teams and planning for the next phase of operations. The human soldiers cleaned their weapons and checked their gear with the same methodical efficiency they had shown during training. They had saved the galaxy, and they were treating it like routine maintenance.